You were taught to crave peace like it was salvation. But I'm not here to comfort you. I'm here to tell you that chasing peace is why you feel powerless. You were lied to, not with violence, with softness, with bedtime words about kindness, healing, forgiveness. You were told that peace would save you, but all it did was put you to sleep. Even Carl Jung, the man they quote when they want to sound enlightened, warned of this. He said, "No tree, it is said, can grow to heaven unless its roots reach down to hell." He didn't preach peace. He preached confrontation with yourself, with your shadow, with everything you hide behind the word balance. Here's my stance. Peace, as it's sold today, is anesthesia. It's a way to dull the blade of your becoming. You're not broken because you lack peace. You're broken because you've been at war with your own potential, and you surrendered before the first battle. This isn't a message for the content. It's a message for the restless, the ones who know, deep down, that comfort is killing them. And if that's you, we begin now. You were told that peace was the prize, that if you lived right, spoke gently, avoided friction, and stayed agreeable, the world would reward you with calm. But what you received instead was a kind of slow suffocation, a quiet erasure of something raw inside you. They called it balance. You called it growth. But somewhere along the way you stopped recognizing yourself in the silence. You didn't choose this version of yourself. You edited yourself into it, cut away the instincts that made others nervous, buried the edge in your voice, the fire in your thoughts, all to avoid conflict, all to keep things peaceful. But you forgot one truth. The absence of conflict isn't peace, it's anesthesia. Carl Jung warned that when you repress the parts of yourself that are wild, instinctive, and untamed, they don't disappear. They go underground. They become the shadow. And eventually, they own you from beneath. He didn't say peace was wrong. He said that peace without integration is delusion. They call you calm, but you know better. It's not calm. It's collapse. It's the exhaustion of someone who has spent too long trying to be easy to love. You've confused being inoffensive with being wise. You've mistaken passivity for harmony. But peace isn't found in erasing parts of yourself to fit the room. It's found in holding all of who you are, in choosing what you reveal with precision, not fear. You dulled yourself for them. Every time you bit your tongue to avoid tension, every time you agreed to avoid being alone, every time you smiled through disgust, hoping it would pass. And now you wonder why no one sees you. The truth is, they only ever saw the version of you that they designed. That version is convenient, predictable, a man who doesn't speak too loudly, challenge too directly, or burn too hot. You made yourself small enough to be tolerated, and in doing so lost the only thing that makes peace worth having: power. Because real peace is not submission, it's control, not external. Jung didn't advocate for stillness born of fear. He sought the kind of silence that comes after the storm, the kind that only exists when a man has looked into himself, seen the chaos there, and made it kneel. But you never got that far. You stopped at the surface. You called your discomfort discipline when it was actually defeat. You can't find peace if you're terrified of what you'll see when things get loud. You can't find strength if you keep rewarding yourself for being tolerable. The poison wasn't in the conflict. It was in the lie that told you peace meant avoiding it. And that lie still lives inside you. They told you to be careful with your anger, to hide it, manage it, file it down until it looked like patience. They taught you to be ashamed of your intensity, as if fire itself was a character flaw. And so you buried it. You folded the sharp corners of your identity and tucked them beneath politeness. Every time something inside you wanted to rise, you pushed it back down. You called it maturity. They called it emotional intelligence. But it was neither. It was erasure. They never warned you what happens when a man spends too long pretending he has no shadow. Carl Jung did. He said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. And that's what happened to you. The shadow didn't leave. It simply grew teeth in the dark. It began to choose your fears, your habits, your relationships. It chose who you let disrespect you. It chose how far you'd let them go. Because the man who refuses to face himself becomes a slave to whatever part of him speaks loudest. And when you've been taught that only the gentle parts of you are acceptable, the rest becomes exile. But what if the parts they told you to fear were never the enemy? What if the mirror they warned you against, the one that shows your rage, your jealousy, your ambition, wasn't a curse, but a tool? What if that reflection was the map to your freedom? They didn't want you to find it, because a man who integrates all of himself cannot be manipulated. A man who has seen the worst in himself cannot be controlled with shame. You've been avoiding your own reflection for so long you've started to believe you're smaller than you are. You speak softly not out of wisdom, but because you're terrified of what might come out if you raise your voice. You think you're peaceful, you're just afraid of your own power. Jung didn't preach balance through suppression, he called for confrontation. The moment when a man stands before the part of himself he hates most and listens. But you've been too scared to hear it, because if you did, you'd have to admit that everything you blamed on circumstance was really your own submission. You've spent years trying to be liked, not because you crave love, but because you fear rejection more than you value truth. You feared being alone more than you feared being hollow. And that's why they told you to smash the mirror, because if you ever looked too closely, you'd see it. You were never broken. You were simply unfinished, untamed, unintegrated, dangerous. Not because you were evil, but because you were whole. You don't need to fix yourself. You need to reclaim the pieces they taught you to discard. Because those pieces, yes, even the darkest ones, are yours. And no man finds peace by throwing away the parts that make him real. What if peace was never meant to feel safe? You've been chasing the sensation of stillness, mistaking it for wholeness. But peace, real peace, isn't soft. It's forged, fought for, built like a fortress in a war zone. You thought peace meant the absence of tension, but the absence of tension is often just avoidance dressed up in spiritual language. You meditated to silence the scream instead of listening to what it wanted. You called it healing, but healing without confrontation is just decoration. Carl Jung understood this. He said that the journey to peace must pass through the underworld, not around it, not above it, through it. And yet you keep trying to skip that part. You want serenity without sacrifice, control without chaos, light without the burden of shadow. That's not enlightenment. That's entitlement. There is no peace without war. Not out there, but in here, inside the psyche, inside the memory, inside the old wounds you've renamed as personality traits just to avoid touching them. You're not seeking peace. You're seeking anesthesia. You don't want to grow. You want to be excused. And here's the uncomfortable truth. The universe doesn't reward innocence. It rewards integration. Not the man who avoids conflict, but the one who walks into it with his eyes open and hands steady. Friedrich Nietzsche wrote, "You must still have chaos within you to give birth to a dancing star." He didn't mean that chaos makes you unstable. He meant that chaos, when understood, is your source of creation. That peace comes not after you've silenced the storm, but after you've survived it and claimed it as your own. You've been at war with yourself for years. But instead of confronting your darker instincts, you've tried to exile them like criminals. You want to be gentle, composed, in control. But control without pressure is not. A blade that has never been tested will shatter on contact. A man who has never stood in his own fire will burn the moment life stops being polite. Peace is not your right. It is your responsibility. And you don't earn it by avoiding chaos. You earn it by commanding it. You want to stop chasing peace? Then stop running from the war inside your chest. The one between the version of you they designed and the version of you buried beneath obedience. Because that battlefield isn't going away. You either fight it on your terms, or it will consume you on its own. And when it does, there will be no peace left, only regret. Because you had the chance to become whole, but you chose to be safe, and nothing about that was ever peaceful. There is a kind of silence that breaks men, the kind that grows out of fear, of unresolved tension, of questions you've never allowed yourself to answer. You've known this kind of silence well. It sits heavy in the chest, wrapped in hesitation. You pause before you speak. You rehearse your truth behind your teeth, waiting for permission that never comes. You mistake this paralysis for maturity, but what you're really practicing is self-erasure in slow motion. You didn't always live this way. There was a time when instinct came before overthinking, when conviction wasn't something you had to justify to yourself, but somewhere along the way you were taught that safety lies in suppression, that to be accepted, you must become agreeable, that silence is the highest form of control. But they never told you that this kind of silence is not a fortress. It is a cage, and you are the one who locked the door. Carl Jung never praised the quiet man simply for being quiet. His silence came after a war. It was the product of internal integration, not avoidance. He believed peace could only arise when a man had walked the full perimeter of his own psyche and stood face to face with what he found there: his shadow, his rage, his contradictions, and chose not to flee. Jung understood that silence is only powerful when it belongs to a man who has confronted his own chaos and emerged whole, not hollow. The truth is, most people never get there. They stop at repression. They confuse discipline with numbness. They think that by not reacting, they're evolving. But stillness that grows from fear is not peace. It is stagnation. You've worn your silence like armor, but deep down, it has corroded. It no longer protects you. It defines you, and not in the way you hoped. The silence you want, the kind you sense exists but haven't yet earned, feels different. It doesn't tremble. It doesn't ask to be understood. It simply stands, because it has nothing to prove, because it has faced itself, buried the illusion, and returned with something sharper than words: presence. That's the silence people feel when a real man enters a room. Not bravado, not threat, but gravity. A quiet force carved from confrontation, shaped through suffering, and sealed by self-mastery. And that man, the one who carries his silence like a sword, doesn't need validation. He doesn't shrink from discomfort. He doesn't react to bait. He chooses. Jung pointed to this silence, the kind born of individuation, of reconciling opposites within the self. You were never meant to eliminate your fire, your ambition, your rage. You were meant to orchestrate them. You were meant to integrate them into a center so complete that nothing outside of you could pull you off balance. You stop chasing peace the moment you understand that silence isn't the absence of conflict, it's the command of it. And that kind of silence, it isn't soft, it's surgical, and no one survives it unchanged. There is a quiet tragedy in the life of a man who never allowed himself to become dangerous. It doesn't show up in the form of dramatic collapse. It's far more subtle, an erosion that begins with small concessions, repeated often, until what remains is a life shaped entirely by avoidance. You know this erosion. It looks like compromise, but it tastes like regret. You've said yes when everything in your gut screamed no. You've walked away from confrontation not because you were above it, but because you were afraid of what it would reveal in you. That you have power, that you have limits, that you are capable of fury, and that you've spent years pretending not to be. What you lost wasn't just time. You lost credibility with yourself, because every time you silenced your edge, every time you swallowed the hard truth just to keep the peace, you taught your subconscious that your survival depended on submission. You trained yourself to flinch before speaking. You turned your instincts into liabilities. And now when life demands clarity and presence, you hesitate, not because you're weak, but because you've spent too long rehearsing weakness in the name of being good. Carl Jung wrote that a man who does not confront his shadow becomes possessed by it. But before that possession takes hold, something even worse happens. He becomes unseen. The world doesn't register softness as virtue. It registers it as absence. The dangerous man who chooses discipline is respected. The agreeable man who avoids conflict is simply forgotten. You were never warned about this. No one told you that avoiding power doesn't protect your morality, it hollows it. They convinced you that strength was something to apologize for, that clarity was cruelty, that boundaries were a form of arrogance. And so you folded. You learned to smile through the slow violence of being ignored. You turned your own discomfort into a personality and called it calm. But here's the truth. Goodness without strength is meaningless. Morality without capability is decoration. You cannot be good if you are incapable of consequence, because then your goodness is not a choice. It's a default, a symptom of fear, not of character. They never feared your kindness. They feared your potential, the part of you you've buried because it made people uncomfortable, the part that knows exactly when a line has been crossed, the part that doesn't ask for permission. You've spent your life trying to be easy to live with, forgetting you were supposed to become someone they could not live without. So now you face the cost, not the pain of becoming dangerous, but the quiet decay that comes from never daring to be. You want peace, then reclaim your capability. Become someone whose presence ends conversations, not because you're loud, but because you are no longer uncertain. You cannot be harmless and whole at the same time. And if no one's told you that before, then consider this your warning. There comes a point where the chase ends, not because you found what you were looking for, but because you finally understand that you were looking in the wrong direction all along. Peace was never meant to be pursued. It is not something you catch, or maintain, or protect like a fragile ornament. It's something you build, and only after you've burned down everything that was built on fear. For you, that fire was overdue. You stop chasing peace the moment you realize the chase itself is a form of surrender. A man in pursuit of stillness is already admitting that something inside him is louder than he can handle. But once you've faced that noise, once you've walked into it without flinching, and stood there long enough for it to recognize you, you come back changed, not cleansed, not healed, just aware. And that awareness is everything. Carl Jung didn't speak of peace as a place to rest. He spoke of peace as the product of inner order, of confronting the abyss, naming it, and choosing to continue. Peace in this sense is not the silence after the battle. It is the decision not to flee before one begins. Now you don't speak as much, not because you've lost your voice, but because you no longer need it to validate your presence. You've seen what you are. You've sat with the parts of yourself that once terrified you, your desire, your rage, your capacity to destroy, and you didn't run. That alone makes you unrecognizable to the man you used to be. You understand now that calm is not a performance. It is not a posture you hold to please others. It is the stillness that comes when you've buried the need to be seen, to be liked, to be accepted by people who never truly understood you. This version of peace doesn't ask for understanding. It demands nothing, and that's precisely what makes it so powerful. They will sense it in you, the change. You won't announce it, but they'll feel it in your silence. The tension in your restraint, the precision in your words, the refusal to chase things you used to beg for. You no longer reach, you anchor. And the man who anchors himself is the one the world orbits around. You don't explain yourself anymore. You don't overcorrect your sharpness or dim your vision to make others comfortable. Not out of bitterness, but out of clarity. Because once you've walked through your own fire, the opinions of those who never faced theirs become irrelevant. This is peace, not the kind they taught you, not the kind they could sell, but the kind that no one can steal, question, or fake. The kind that leaves you whole, because you didn't find it, you forged it. And if you've made it here, drop this in the comments. I will never chase sedation again.